Welcome back to the show. Just over 5 years on from the Arab Spring, we are talking about its impact on the Middle East and North Africa. Joining me now from London is Abdul Bari Atwan. He is editor-in-chief of the Arab opinion website Rai Al-Yum, and he's the founder and former editor of Al-Quds Al-Arabi newspaper. And with me here also in the studio is Sahar Khamis. She's an expert on Arab media, and she's an associate professor of communication at the University of Maryland. Welcome both to the show. Let's start with you in London, Abdul Bari. Arab Spring, 5 years on. Lots to report, but let's step back. What caused the Arab Spring and why did it spread so quickly?
Well, actually, yes. Many people in the Middle East hoping that it will be a spring, but you know, the outcome is disastrous. Now we have more than 5 failed states, military intervention, civil wars, and the oil revenues evaporated in arms deals and in wars, you know, in Yemen and Syria. So it is a disaster, to be honest. Personally, I was one of the optimistic people that this spring actually could change the Middle East to the better. But the outcome is, you know, it's for the worse, and that's what happened. And the picture is very, very grim now, and people are really frustrated. More than 300,000 people killed in Syria. The same thing, similar thing happened in Libya. Now there will be another intervention by NATO in Libya to fix the first intervention or the outcome of the first intervention 5 years ago. So, okay, maybe we get rid of dictators, certain dictators, but we also get rid of the stability of the region.
Instability, Sahar Khamis. Lots of people talking about an Arab winter now after the Arab Spring. How do we get to this point? Because, as we've said, there was so much hope and optimism at the beginning.
Yeah, there's a saying that says, you know, that it's always easier to get rid of a dictator than to figure out what to do next. And that's exactly what happened in the Arab Spring movements, unfortunately. There was a lot of optimism, a lot of enthusiasm, and even euphoria at the beginning. And we were all so excited. You know, I'm a citizen of Egypt. I was so excited about the Egyptian revolution, you know, naturally in 2011, and about the Arab awakening movements in general, hoping that will bring a lot of stability and security and prosperity to the region. And unfortunately, like the other guest just mentioned, things went the wrong way, in the wrong direction. And I think a big part of that is because there was no clear script or scenario of what could possibly happen next. There's no strong NGO organizations, no strong civil society, and no strong opposition movements. That meant that you have a power vacuum. It means that you have dictators ousted from office, but you don't have a real replacement or substitute of who can possibly effectively fill in for them.
Or full disclosure, I was actually in Egypt during the revolution and actually was in Libya as well. And I want to pick up on a point you just made with Abdul Bari about Libya. Sahar Khamis basically said that the lack of institutions across the region, the rule of law, stability, created this vacuum. You've been very critical of the West's intervention in Libya, Abdul Bari. Is that what you saw in that example?
Yes, you know, I was critical simply because I know, you know, this kind of intervention, military intervention by NATO, it will make things worse. Because if we have a very, very bad experience in the Arab world. Whenever there is a Western intervention, military intervention on our part of the world, it does create a failed states. And this failed state is the better environment, the best incubator for radical organization like Al-Qaeda, like the Islamic State. So, and also it will be a springboard for illegal immigrants to go to the other side of the Mediterranean, to Europe, and create a lot of problems. So when I was opposing it, I knew that the American, okay, they can intervene, they can change regimes, but they don't have plan B. So imagine NATO's countries, which is about 28 of the most sophisticated, most advanced countries on earth. They could not actually create the alternative model for the Libyan people and for the Arab world, the way actually they did in Iraq. So this is the problem we are facing now. Okay, they changed the regime and they left. Why they did not actually establish a strong army? Why they did not establish a proper security forces? Why they did not actually create a proper government? So why they did not wait until this kind of institution is rebuilt again, to have independent judicial system, to have freedom of expression, to have proper security to the whole country, to keep the country intact? But they changed the regime and they left. The same thing in Iraq. They occupied Iraq and then they left. You know, and we can see what's happening. Now the Syria is the same. We have a congestion of warplanes on the Syrian airspace, and nobody can tell what will happen. The Russian are there, the British are there, the French are there, the American are there, the Saudi are there, and it is endless. So we cannot tell who is there, and nobody is, you know, left not intervening in Syria. Is this the Arab Spring?
To me, that is an explanation of part of the problem, but not the entire problem.
Because, of course, you have Western intervention, there's lots of criticism of that, but also the societies themselves had to be responsible.
Absolutely, thank you so much. That's exactly what I want to say. It's a partial explanation, but not a full explanation, because Western intervention, military intervention, yes, of course, it does play a big part in this whole scenario that we are witnessing now and the disappointment we are seeing in the region, but we cannot hold it accountable for everything that went wrong. So definitely, issues of like building and rebuilding civil society institutions, strengthening the youth movements, opposition movements from within societies themselves. Societies have to find their own mechanisms, their own recipe, if you will, for success and for reinventing themselves in a successful way. And that cannot be totally and entirely blamed just on the West. There is a responsibility for these societies internally to rebuild and reinvent themselves and to find good scenarios to substitute and to fill in for ousted governments and dictators.
Let's take the example of Egypt, Sahar, because the Muslim Brotherhood, obviously a very well-organized organization, propelled into power by the ballot box after that revolution, but then criticized so much for what they did. Does that play into the scenario that you're talking about?
Well, I think that they made a fatal mistake by really, nominating a president for office when they said they're not going to nominate a president, and then if they really stayed as a strong opposition movement, things would have been much better for them and also for the country as a whole. The fact that they took power when they were not prepared for it, Morsi was a kind-hearted, well-intentioned person. He was not necessarily a very strong leader or well-prepared to lead Egypt at this stage. However, having said that, ousting him from office by military, intervention and, taking over again the government through the military is not the answer or the solution either. In fact, it did much more harm than good, and it threw off the country, I say decades back in terms of human rights and in terms of democracy and in terms of the path to democratization and reform. So the whole scenario shows what I'm talking about, the power vacuum, that you don't have clear institutions or organizations that can fill this power vacuum. So you are left with two players in the case of Egypt, the military and the Muslim Brotherhood. In my view, neither of them is well equipped to rule.
What about stability argument, Abdul Bari? Because, for example, Bahrain was another country, but then you look at Yemen. Is stability trumping the idea of reform in the Middle East post-Arab Spring?
Well, actually, you cannot have reforms if you don't have stability in any country in the world, not only in the Arab world. And you can see this kind of instability actually blocked any kind of reforms, whether democratic reforms or economic reforms. This is the problem we are facing now in the Middle East. And also the other problem is, which is created by the Arab Spring in a way or another, and by the military intervention also, is the sectarian division. If you look at the Bahrain, for example, there is a huge sectarian division. If you look at Saudi Arabia, there is a huge sectarian division. In Syria, the same thing. In Iraq, the same thing. Who created this? Created this simply because it is first the military intervention. Second, actually nobody was aware of this kind of a problem which we are facing now, and it could create sectarian wars. So now, in the past, we were looking for democracy, for freedoms, for stability. Now, we are on the edge of a sectarian war.
Abdul Bari, in hindsight, then, do you think in a country like Libya would be better off with Muammar Gaddafi than it is today?
Well, actually, after we've seen what happened in Libya, the destruction, the militias who are controlling everything, the Islamic State, which is setting actually bases in Sirte, Emirates in Sirte, and also in Derna, and also in the south. So when we see that, I believe, okay, Muammar al-Gaddafi could be much better. And I met a lot of Libyans who were against the revolution, who were against Gaddafi. And they are saying we are longing to Saddam Hussein and his time. And also Iyad Allawi, one of the arch opposer to Saddam Hussein. Just a week ago, he said, the Iraqi people are longing to that time of Saddam Hussein, where Iraq was Iraq, stability was there, people coexisting. So if we actually started to put pressure on this regime to reform gradually, step by step, and not actually intervening by military power to change them, and then leave the country in a huge anarchy, a bloody anarchy, if you ask me now, I will say no. I prefer, to have a dictator than that bloody anarchy, which is costing us a lot of innocent lives in Libya, in Syria, in Lebanon, in Iraq, in Yemen, everywhere.
Abdul Bari, I just want to bring in Sahar Khamis here.
Unfortunately, that is very dangerous because this mindset of we were better off when Mubarak was in office. Mubarak was a dictator for 30 years ruling Egypt, and we had the revolution in 2011 to get rid of corruption and violations of human rights. And the point that people are now saying things like, oh, it would have been better had we had Mubarak in office, or Saddam Hussein, or Gaddafi. That means that we are not really able to put in the clear path to democratization and reform, which needs to be scripted, and rather we are, looking back to the dictators that we wanted to initially get rid of in 2011, and that's why we had the Arab Spring movements in the first place. So this mindset, unfortunately, is starting to be very widespread in the region, and to me, that is an alarming sign, because rather than saying what went wrong, what were the mistakes done, how can we possibly overcome them or avoid them in the future, we are now looking back and saying, oh, the days of Mubarak, despite his dictatorship, were better off than what we have now, the days of Saddam Hussein and Gaddafi and so on. So, basically to me, we should not compare, we should not say that was better. We should say that was a bad chapter. Now we have a worse chapter, but what can we do in order to get back on the right track to democratization and reform and to rebuild these societies internally, with their own resources, not really looking always to the West for answers and solutions, but trying to also find our own mechanisms for salvation and for reinventing our societies successfully and democratically from within.